Welcome back to A and A Diversified. The microphone was malfunctioning, and I didn't realize it till I had several hours of footage recorded on our project here. So I'm just going to be talking you through a few things. I have the 1996 Chevy S10 back in the shop with the coolant leak we had spotted previously when we were working on the wheel bearings. Had a leak from the intake manifold. It was a pretty bad leak. You could put a gallon of antifreeze in it and take a very short trip, and he was low again. So we're going to be, first of all, making sure that's where the leak's at, and we're going to be showing you in part one the disassembly, which is really not very exciting, and then part two will be the reassembly. Starting out, I've got my pressure tester on it, and I'm pumping it up. I'm going to have to pump pretty fast because the leak is so bad. It's leaking out about as fast as I can pump it. And so we're watching the little needle fall quickly. And on the driver's side, we can hear very plainly the air escaping. And I had put some just plain water in it, and then the air was followed by the water that come gushing out. So I like to do the tester with the engine not running. You can, most of the time, can hear the leak before you can see it, and with a running engine, you're not going to hear that air escaping. So major leak on the driver's side. I would suspect that there's leaks on the passenger side as well, because with these engines, the intake manifold gaskets are one of the major failures. So I took an energy pill that morning, so that's why I'm moving so fast. But really, it's kind of uneventful, and a lot of it's just very intuitive. Started out by taking the belt off, and then we've got the air conditioning compressor. It's held on by 4 bolts, and I like the design on this one because those air conditioning lines give you plenty of slack that you can swing that thing, pretty much anywhere you want to. I'm just going to swing it around and lay it on the air box. There's an awful lot of electrical connections, pigtails you have to unplug. I don't worry about those too much because at the reassembly, those typically want to lay back exactly where they came from. So I call it a pedestal. I'm not sure what the correct name for it is, that air conditioning compressor was bolted to. It's also what the power steering pump is bolted to further down. But in looking at gaining access to the bolts that actually hold the intake manifold on, there's one bolt that's underneath the top edge of that pedestal. So I may not have to remove the pedestal, but I've definitely got to get it loose enough to where I can pry it out of the way to get to that one bolt that's under the edge of it. So a big part of my time, I would say probably the majority of my time on the disassembly, was trying to figure out, because I have not worked on this particular engine before, and I had to do a little research, but I could get to 3 of the bolts, or I could get to 2 bolts and 1 nut that was on a stud, and I could get those off, but it still wouldn't budge. Well, there's one at the very, very bottom that you can get to. It's a 14 millimeter. And then there's one behind it, down below the exhaust manifold. It's a 14 millimeter. It has to be loosened or this thing will not budge. So, a couple of tips for you. If you're wondering why it won't budge, there's one on the front, on the very bottom. You can barely see it with your flashlight, and it's a 14 millimeter. On the back side, just below the front of the exhaust manifold, there's another one that's a 14 millimeter, and all you have to do is loosen it. So you'll see me spending an awful lot of time looking at this thing, because I couldn't for the life of me understand. Sure, I didn't have to take the power steering pump off, but that's what it was looking like. And I was almost to that point before I did a little research and realized that there's 2 bolts I could get to that I wasn't seeing. So I'm moving on here, taking brackets loose, bypass hose. There's a miscellaneous variety of 10 millimeter nuts that's holding little brackets on. That's, I don't know, automotive engineers love to just throw brackets and hold down items for wires and hoses, and it's really overkill. And so a lot of that stuff, well, I say a lot. One bracket that you see me right there taking off, that bracket didn't make it back on because it wasn't holding anything. I'm sure it used to hold something, but it doesn't hold anything now, so it didn't make it back onto the vehicle. That's the coolant hose. Your thermostat is underneath that, showing it to you there. It looked okay. One side of it was a little corroded. We ended up replacing that, by the way. We didn't replace any hoses, and we reused the belt. All of that looked okay. I will tell you, while we're watching me try to figure out what to do, when we did end up dropping the oil, I would say at least a half gallon of just plain water came out of the oil drain plug first, followed by what was probably at least a gallon of what appeared to be a butterscotch milkshake, followed by a small amount of oil. This leak had been present for quite some time. And I'm surprised that it didn't do major damage. And I guess that's still to be seen, but as of date, the little truck is running great. That was a little spoiler there, I guess. Notice I've got paper towel stuffed in the throttle body there. I don't know, if your luck is like mine, whenever you take something off and you leave an opening to go into something where it's not easily retrievable, like the throttle body where it goes down into the intake or something like that, put some rags in there, paper towels, something, because you will drop something in there. It's like I'm trying to get the starter unbolted. There's one bolt in the back there that I'm working on. It's a little short bolt. Then there's two long bolts in the front towards the bottom. This job required a variety of tools. I guess as we get older, our eyes aren't as good as they used to be. A really bright flashlight is my number one tool. There was quite a variety of tools that I used on this little project. Of course, your 10mm, that's a given. We used 1/2 inch stuff, 9/16. We used 1/4 inch, a lot of 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch ratchet stuff, simply because of the space involved that the others just couldn't get into. So we used 1/2 inch drive, we used 3/8 inch drive, and we used 1/2 inch drive tools. And we used a lot of wrenches. Like I say, it's mainly about space and what you can get in where. I also used a 16mm line wrench for the fuel lines that you'll have to disconnect. Right now it looks like I'm working on a bolt that, come to find out, I didn't need to get it off at all, so I ended up putting it back. But I spent a little bit of time on it trying to get it off. When you're working on an engine that you've not worked on before, there is a lot of wasted time. Because you're not familiar with the shortcuts or the tips and the tricks. So I will tell you, on the alternator, there's 2 in the front, long bolts, and then there's 1 on the top on the back, and that's all you need to get the alternator out. It won't want to come out because it's pinched at the bottom where it bolts. There's some little some shims, and you'll see it once you start taking yours off. There's some little shims that, once they bolt that alternator in good and tight, when you take the bolts out, those shims are still holding it tight. And so you just take a screwdriver or something, put up under that alternator, and it'll pop out. That's the bracket that holds your accelerator linkage cables. and I think the other cable is probably the cruise control cable. Now I'm working on the bracket that's holding the ignition coil. So that's your ignition coil right there. It's on a little bracket of its own. A couple of little 10mm nuts, and it comes right off of a couple of studs. Or actually, I think it was under the studs. Don't remember. And here I am, still investigating this pedestal, for lack of whatever it's called. I spent a lot of time on that thing. I don't like the design of that, you know, for the record. You can kind of see, without getting too close up, you can kind of see the level of crud where this intake manifold's been leaking. The level of buildup of residue, you know, oil and the coolant, and along the top of that, around the edges of the intake manifold where it's up against the valve covers, is some pretty significant buildup. So once you do get the bolts loose that I mentioned, the one on the bottom of the front and the one below the front of the exhaust manifold, you can pry it forward to get to that bolt head. So at this point, my camera battery is going dead and I don't realize it. So it's about to shut off, and then we're going to reload. Well, my battery went dead on the camera without me realizing it. So what you missed was I got the distributor out to the back, and I got these fuel lines. Got the fuel lines disconnected, got them off, and that's all you missed. And so I believe should be, oh yeah, she's ready to come off now. But I'm gonna call this the end of part one. This will be the part one, will just be the disassembly. But I know we're not completely disassembled yet, but you know, the mystery of what's underneath here is, I know it's got you on the edge of your seat. Anyway, that's gonna wrap up part one. Part two, we're gonna get this intake off. She's all disconnected, ready to come off. There's actually two parts to this intake. You have a lower section. The light's not very good, but you have a lower section, and if you see these little bolts here, that's your upper section. Lower section, upper section. Within the upper section, there's some things we're gonna need to replace while we've got it off. Mainly a fuel pressure regulator. That, you know, this one still works, but I'm pretty sure it's the original. While we've got it off, let's get that dude replaced, because if not, and a month down the road, that goes bad, we got to go through all this again. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
So, into part one, y'all check in to see what part two holds. We'll get to cleaning this thing up. Try to put some valve cover gaskets on it, clean these valve covers up, clean this intake up. That way, when we do have a leak in the future, might be a little easier to spot. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for part two. Be kind to one another. See you next time.